The best books, the best Bible studies are born out of pain. Together addresses one of the core issues that we have in the local church today, which is loneliness in the presence of people. I hear from people, I've experienced myself, the devastation of going to a church hoping to find connection and community and walking to the car feeling more alone than when I came. There are those who are part of a small group that feel like this thing is stuck. It's shallow. It's not getting beyond the surface, so it's not meeting the deeper heart needs I have. But I don't want to bail on it. It's the best that the church has to offer, so how do we make it something that looks more like the New Testament version of community? So for all those people out there who feel alone in the midst of a sea of people, Together was written for you. It's for that frustrated small group leader. It's for that senior pastor who longs to see desire in his people for community. It's for that person who's showing up to group every week with sad eyes and leaving with even sadder eyes. How do we begin to reimagine what Jesus had in mind when he said that we should live life together? I am most fulfilled when I am most known by people around me. And I have to put myself into those spaces where I have the courage to demonstrate that. Well, hello, everybody. I'm here with my pal, Tyler Litton, and I want to tell you why I'm with Tyler. Tyler and I are road tripping buddies. Whenever I have to travel a long distance with Lifeway, on 2 occasions, I've taken Tyler with me, and we talk the whole way and back about movies.
Movies, that's right.
You're one of my favorite people to talk to. And when I was told that I have to do some self-promotion for this Together study, I loathe this with all of my being, but I thought maybe it'll be less painful if Tyler and I are talking about it, and we're like having a cup of coffee about it.
That's right.
So thanks for coming on and talking to me about this new study coming out.
Ben, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. We're going to get through this self-promotion.
Can you hold my hand?
That's right. I'm going to the whole time. Just know, if you're listening, we're holding hands the entire time. I've been on the Glass House once before. It's nice to be back. For you listening, the Glass House is very clean. Like looking around in here, you can really see everything through all the glass.
I want to say I have really wrestled with. Scripture says, "Let another one praise you with their lips and not your own." And marketing, means like you have to tell the market it exists.
Right. You have to say what it is, and you have to.
So just know I'm living in the tension of I want to not be embarrassed about the hard work that not just me, a ton of people put into this product, from video to editing to design, but at the same time, be also aware that there's always that temptation,
right,
to speak too much of yourself.
Yeah.
So thanks for walking me through this.
100%. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm also, I know you can't say it, but am genuinely excited about this resource. I was flipping through it this morning, and was really struck by how timely it feels. This feels like a 2 millennia old issue that we should be dealing with. And why does it feel so timely today? I'm a millennial, self-identifying hipster. I'm fine with that title. And I hear my community talking about community all the time as something that they don't seem to really be able to pin down. It seems incredibly elusive.
Yeah.
I've heard the most unbelievable thing about Christ is that he maintained 12 relationships as an adult with his disciples. Not the miracles, just the ability to keep and maintain friends. Why do you think this is written for today?
Well, I think we're all talking about and tired of talking about the post-COVID world.
Yeah.
If I hear it one more time, like, in the post-COVID world.
That's right.
But we have to admit that COVID accelerated trends, a lot of trends. One of the trend was toward isolation. So, I think in the 80s, a book was written called Bowling Alone. It was a social experiment on why are bowling leagues dying? And this man discovered that people are becoming less and less interested in getting together with other people. So the death of the bowling league was just one symptom of a greater sociological issue, which is people are wanting to live isolated lives. Now, you hit COVID and we all go into quarantine. And when we came out, we surveyed all the senior pastors that, a big, massive Lifeway Research did this and discovered that one of the most frustrating pieces for the senior pastor right now in these days is trying to get people to get together.
Yeah.
Man, they will come and grab a sermon and then leave at the last song. They'll be involved in a kids event if their kids are entertained. But man, if you ask them to give, serve, or be regularly in a group,
right,
it's just not happening.
Yeah.
And so Together was written as kind of let's look back at how this whole thing started and how have we drifted? And we have.
So let's that's a great segue. Let's jump back 2,000 years ago, and roughly, and let's talk about what the Acts 2 church looked like and what community looked like for them. And specifically, this might be a good way to start, is how was that a massive innovation for the time?
Yeah. This is like the most uninteresting answer, but the answer it is. They spent tons of time together.
Yeah.
I mean, they met every day in the temple courts. They broke bread in each other's homes. So there was both a formality and an informality to their relationship. But you just cannot substitute anything for time. Your and I relationship is a perfect example, and I just mentioned it. 14 hours in a car together will
you'll
change
go places.
a relationship.
You'll go places. That's right.
And we have these little tiny sips of community that we call church, where we drop our kids off at childcare. We jump into this side room. We have 30 minutes of conversation, and then we kind of like do some prayer requests and dismiss, and then the rest of the week we don't see each other. And there really isn't, for most people, a deep sense of family in the church. But yet people are hungry for it. They're complaining about it. I can't find community.
Right.
But they're not willing to really pay the price for it, which is time.
Do you think that's the only price that you have to pay?
Definitely not the only price, but right now in this, so much changed when streaming came.
Yeah. Everything.
I mean, people just got used to just staying home.
Yeah.
Movie theaters changed, churches changed, because people are like, what, I'm just going to catch it at home.
Yeah.
Because it's comfortable at home and I can stay in my soft clothes.
Super comfortable. I got my onesie on. I'm good to go.
And it just takes, you start calculating everything by time. Like, oh man, by the time I get to the movies and like get through the line.
Right.
And then get home, man, that doubles the amount of time to catch this film. So I'm just going to watch it at home. Same rationale of the church.
Yeah.
Man, by the time I get dressed, fight the crowds, park, I can just catch it right here online. And yet we don't do the thinking about like what's really happening to us as we make those choices day in, day out. And man, I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I can't just judge everybody else. I do it all the time where I'm like, man, do I really want to go? Or should I just, catch it online?
It would be so much more convenient if I didn't have to talk to anybody about anything ever and share my life. I had a professor once who told me, drink out of ceramic mugs, stay away from paper products. It's a good way to stay away from the void of that sort of existential dread of like, feel it. You're a part of this world.
Yeah.
And there's no really better way than community. Time. I really see that. I read the other day that a medieval peasant, you picture them working in a field and as a serf, just slogging away for week after week. But in reality, they maybe worked like 100. I'm making this up, but it was close to like 100 days out a year. We work so much more in 2024 that I think it's taught us to commodify our time.
Absolutely.
On such a granular level.
And we have so many options now.
Yeah.
I mean, think about what it was like to go to church in the 1800s.
Yes.
There was one church in town.
That's right.
And you rode your horse in there to go.
That's right.
And it's not like you could be like, you know what, there's a new mega church starting down the road. Let's ride another 30 miles because the music's better down there.
That's right. I'm not feeling fed at this church.
So all the options that we have now are causing people to continue to hop around without settling down. And then on top of that, on Instagram, we're watching people travel. Holy cow, look at all these vacations and places people are going, and they're doing it on the weekend.
Yeah.
So if that's the good life, we're got to figure out how to get on more airplanes and be gone on the weekends, which means getting into that granular level of relationships with the same people week after week is becoming less popular.
Right.
And yet the New Testament paints such a different picture of what God had intended for the church.
I love that. I heard the other day that after, talk about more culture making moments in America, after 9/11, travel shows went off a cliff. They just weren't making them, and they were all replaced with home renovation shows. And I think that there's a trend that's been happening for a long time that maybe travel is just another way of avoiding your community, of saying, I'm going to go to Rome, I'm going to go to Japan for the week, or I'm going to renovate my kitchen so that I can have these havens that make it so that I don't have to do. What is it about community that is so hard for people to swallow today that makes it feel like we're trying to avoid it at all costs?
I think one of the hardest parts about relationships in general is just you have to wade through the mundane. Whether you're talking about marriage, there's just so many days where I know my wife is just crazy bored with me right now.
Yeah, the least interesting
and there's seasons
person.
where the relationship just feels like distant, or I'm not feeling it, she's not feeling it. And then all of a sudden, a new season arrives, and all of a sudden the flowers are blooming again, and the clouds part, and the beauty of our relationship comes back to us. Such is the nature of relationships. And so long as we have this expectation that it always has to be exciting, or it always has to be life-giving,
Right.
With options, I go to a church, and all of a sudden for 3 weeks in a row, small group feels a little dull. What am I doing? I'm thinking about maybe joining a different group.
Yeah.
And this
It's
is where
them. It's not me.
Yeah, and the expectation of almost immediate gratification with relationships. I mean, we know that relationships take a long time to develop. I mean, they are a Polaroid picture.
Right.
And if people aren't rooted in a local church, and they're not committed to being there regularly, and they're not going to stick it out through the hard seasons, they're never going to get to the promised land of intimacy.
Right.
So what I try to do with this study is I try to think, okay, if I had 6 sessions with somebody, just to try to motivate and inspire them to want biblical community,
Right.
what would those 6 things be? And so I just kind of sat down, made a massive list, and then started crossing out until I got down to 6,
Right.
the core essentials. And I try not to make it legalistic, but more from a sense of this is the beauty
Right.
of what the church offers. And I hope that through the video teaching and through the actual day-by-day study that people will begin to feel more compelled to be a part of a community.
When I was reading through it this weekend and this morning, there was something that felt therapeutic. I know for some people that feels like a dirty word, especially in a Christian context. But it felt therapeutic. I think one thing I've always liked about your speaking and your writing, Ben, is that it is deeply practical. It doesn't ignore
Thank you.
the human side of it. There might be these grand, incredible ideas, but if it doesn't feel attainable, then what's the point of it? It was like a meta Bible study. It's a Bible study about Bible studies. And I really loved that. I felt like that was so pertinent for today. Did you intend to write something like that? Where were you at when you were coming up with the what we were going to write about?
Writing is such an interesting process because you think you know what you're going to say, and then you sit down and start writing, and
totally different
something
thing.
else comes out.
That's right.
The real heart of the study for me came in the chapter about vulnerability. To me, if you only had one session, I would want you to do Paul's discussion of the thorn in the flesh, because he talks about how weakness is really the thing that makes us strong. And I've noticed this about relationships. I instantly feel connected to somebody who shares with me a weakness.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe they confide in me and they say something like, I don't want a lot of people to know this, but I feel incredibly insecure about my role in the company. I feel like I'm faking it. I feel like if the other people at Lifeway find out how unqualified I am,
Right.
they're going to fire me.
Yeah, that imposter syndrome.
That's real.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden we're having a real conversation about real things. The problem, I think, if you had to really reduce the problem down, is that we have we have developed a culture where people feel like putting their best foot forward is the way to win community and friends. So if I'm in a group, as long as I talk about delightful moments in my devotional life,
Right.
people are going to feel drawn to me.
Yeah.
But the moment when someone says, I think my wife and I might be getting a divorce, it's like there's a hair in the biscuit.
Oh, yeah. Gross.
Nobody knows what to do with that.
Who's
And
eating
yet,
that one?
That's exactly what the church is supposed to be doing, walking with each other through the real struggles of life.
Yeah.
And so I really got a lot out of thinking through how does that apply to like even prayer requests in a small group. I've noticed this. Almost always we offer information about other people that are removed from our personal lives. So like, hey, pray for my grandmother.
Yeah.
She's really going through a hard time for health.
Yeah.
We don't want to actually say our own struggles.
Right.
So we'll share other people's struggles so we can check that off the list of vulnerability. The best definition of vulnerability I've ever heard was when you give someone enough information, they can hurt you with it.
Oh, yeah. Here's a club.
So if you don't get to that point with a group at some point where somebody takes a risk,
Yeah.
that's not real community, and that's not what the Acts 2 church was experiencing, because they met with glad and sincere hearts. Sincerity means no pretense.
It feels like the antithesis to what you're talking about is the unspoken prayer request.
Unspoken.
As well.
Oh,
I can't,
you're not kidding.
I can't utter it. Yeah.
I once was in a small group with a lady who literally every week said, I have an unspoken. And she might as well have just said, I don't trust any of you people with vulnerable information, so I'm just going to stay guarded.
Yeah.
What's the point?
I want you to know that I have a problem, but I don't feel like anybody has actually met my criteria for digging in enough for me to feel like I can expose myself.
Absolutely.
Peter Drucker, the author, consultant, I don't know how he identified, he had a quote that said, for communication in a relationship, you have to pay just as much attention to what is said than to what is being unsaid. When you are entering into a relationship with that many people, what do you think people should look out for? And what do you think is not being said in the church today as a whole?
Well, I think transparency has to start from the top. So when you look at a local church where the pastor is practicing appropriate self-disclosure,
Right.
obviously the pastor doesn't want to come to the pulpit and share all of his stuff.
Right.
But if he's preaching on greed and he tells a story about how greedy he was last week, that really connects with people.
Yeah.
If he tells a story about Rockefeller and how greedy that man was,
Right.
people will be interested, but they won't be changed.
Right.
What really changes people is when somebody, Paul Tripp said this, is rescued by their own preparation. They're sharing with you a message that has rescued them from the temptation of greed. And so they want to share how it's changed them, how it's challenged them.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll challenge you. Too often, preaching comes across as, I've mastered all this stuff several years ago, and now I've put it into a little formula that I think will help you.
Yeah. So you're not suggesting that they can only divulge things they've already conquered. Like they can come with something half-baked and say, this is still something I'm struggling with.
Absolutely. And to say at the beginning of the sermon, you don't know how much of a hypocrite I feel preaching on marriage today when my wife and I had the biggest blow up of our lives this week.
On the way here.
Bam, you got everybody in the room.
Yep.
But when you have an Instagram kind of personality and like the only thing people see are you and your wife enjoy.
Right.
They're like, I don't relate to that. That's not how my marriage works. So I'm getting to the point. If the pastor makes it a point to model vulnerability, it seems to flow down to the pew, down to the small group room. When the pastor is plastic, you have plastic small groups. There are some exceptions, but he sets the culture. So I think in order for small groups to model appropriate disclosure, self-disclosure, they have to see somebody week in, week out showing them how.
Right.
I mean, how many people grew up in a home? Very few people who say, we regularly talked about hurt, shame, guilt, and fear.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't know that person.
We didn't grow up in homes like this. So in the church, we come with all that baggage in the sense of, I don't know how to talk about this stuff. I need someone to show me.
Yeah.
So I really feel like small groups will be the healthiest when church leadership begins to model it.
I love that. And it comes down. And that I feel like that's how the church was set up a long time ago. It starts at the top. Have you ever heard of this concept called Dunbar's number?
No.
This was new to me like today. So I'm not like an intellectual who just walks around with this stuff in my head. It was in the 90s. It was this guy who posited that there was a cap to how many relationships in a community that one individual could have. And he described it as 150. He said there was some variation there. That wasn't a hard number, but that 150 people were the most that a person could be in relationship with. Does that resonate with you? That feels like a lot of people to me.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not at a really deep level.
Yeah.
But you could be connected.
Yeah.
People complain all the time about, I went to such and such a church. It's too big.
Right.
Well, if it runs 300, it's too big.
Right.
It's too big for you to know everybody.
Right.
You really got to get into a group.
Right.
So you relate to everybody in the masses, and then you relate to a few in depth. So it doesn't matter if a church runs 5,000 or 500. It's the same.
Yeah.
In the sense that there's a lot of acquaintances around here, but there's a collection of little tribes.
Yeah.
They've decided to walk through life together. That's the piece that people are missing. They're coming into the big room and they're hearing a sermon and they're feeling moved by the worship, but it doesn't translate to life-on-life ministry.
Right.
Wayne Grudem, in his systematic theology, he says there's three purposes for the church. I love this. It's so simple. One is ministry to God, that's worship. We're called to serve God through worshiping. Number two is ministry to believers. That's discipleship and nurture, like caring for other people in the life of the church. There's a lot to be said in the New Testament about just caring for the household of faith.
Right.
And then the third one is ministry to the world, evangelism and mercy ministry. So worship, discipleship or nurture, and then evangelism. So if all you're doing is worshiping and you're not taking a step forward in depth and getting to know anybody in your church,
right.
You're not serving alongside any of them to evangelize or bring mercy to your city, you're living in the 1/3 of the pie. And it's just not enough to sustain joy.
You need the whole pie.
You need the whole pie.
I feel like one thing that this Bible study touches on really well is a balance between the individual and the group. It never disrespects the individual and says, well, you just need to push those things aside. And I brought up that or feelings aside. I brought up the Dunbar's number because I think a lot of Christians feel like it's their job to just say yes to everything that God sends them. That discernment in a relationship doesn't have any place, and that can be exhausting. I know for some people when we're talking about time and we're talking about energy and where as Christians we're putting that Christ would love everybody. So I need to find a way to love everybody. Can you talk about the other side of that coin and what discernment might look like in the context of a group of people, respecting that individual and the group together?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I try to do in the study is make it a personal devotional exercise, but also a group exercise. So, for example, the first lesson is about how the early church devoted themselves to four things.
Right.
The apostles' teaching, fellowship,
Right.
the breaking of bread, which was communion or confession, and prayer. So those four things God decided before he consulted with us.
Right.
These are the four things that are going to be the non-essential. I mean, the absolute essentials. These are the four things that are going to be the absolute essentials to biblical fellowship, to biblical community. So we have a corporate responsibility in that.
Right.
Like it's the pastor's job to make sure that worship is planned and that small groups are organized and that there's communion that's going to happen, regularly on whatever basis they decide, and that there's prayer.
Right.
But there's also an individual level in which, if I'm a part of this community, it only gets healthier as each member gets healthier. So I have to take a step forward in teaching. I have to take a step forward in fellowship. I have to take a step forward in confessing my sins and taking the Lord's Supper. I have to take a step forward in prayer. So how do you do community without owning your part of it?
Yeah.
You can't. So that's one of the things I try to do in the study is like always bring it down to, but what's my part in it?
Right.
Because I can't control the greater part. I had the most interesting discussion with my small group at church this week. We were talking about the importance of worship.
Okay.
And how everybody has ridiculously large lists of preferences in worship.
Oh, tons.
And
Ad nauseum.
no Bible verses to support any of our preferences.
Right.
So he's like,
I just feel
let's start
like
naming things that distract you or you don't like about worship.
Right.
I'd love to hear your list. Here's some of the things that come up. I hate it when people bring drinks into the sanctuary.
Oh yeah. Get them out of here.
There's this one person that only raises their hands during a certain song.
He shouts amen too loud.
There's typos in the PowerPoint. Right. Drives me crazy.
Can I say when I was in charge of PowerPoint at my dad's church, I misspelled diamond once and I never heard the end of it. I spelled it like demond. It was, end of the world.
I mean, can you think of a couple of things that when you walk into a worship service that, like, for you, no Bible verse attached, it just really bothers you?
Yeah. Oh, for action. Okay.
Like off the top.
Showmanship.
Okay.
In church.
Like on the stage?
Drives me up the wall.
What's it look like?
What does the bad version of it look like?
Yeah, like what are you picturing when you think showmanship?
Haze everywhere.
High production.
High production.
Fog machines.
The pastor's flying in like on some kind of like high wire act. Fog machines. You have 5 women up on stage with big dumb hats, and they're all lifting their hands, and I can't hear any of them because they've all been mixed down for the one guy on stage as well. It just looks like a stereotype.
So anything that looks like it's a facade.
It's a cliche.
Really drives you crazy.
Drives me nuts.
Can you name the Bible verse that you could use to support that?
That's the book of Hezekiah. No clue. I can't do it.
The reason this conversation is so important in the local church is that we have to get comfortable with the fact that we all have these petty preferences. And as long as we hold closely to those, we're just never going to find a church that real relationships can happen, because it's only a matter of time before those distraction things pop up. And so you ask people's questions. You ask them questions about why they left the church. Like, I recently heard a lady tell me this. I left that church because they had this big camera that like was recording the services, just distracted me every Sunday.
Oh yeah, they had like iMag like up on the screen.
So forget the relationships,
Right.
all of the service, the things they had in common. It was that camera. And if you're looking for something that's going to give you a reason to go find another group of people to try, you're always going to find something.
Yep.
And I'm the same way. I mean, it's not like I'm immune from this.
Right.
This last Sunday I was at church, and I noticed as the pastor was wrapping up and the musicians were coming up, an overwhelming desire to just walk out to my car and leave before I had to talk to anybody on the way out.
Oh yeah, I want to hide.
I just want to get out of here because I don't have to bump into people and make small talk and
again
and have a relationship.
Right. That's right.
I got what I wanted.
Yeah.
I think if we can become aware of how our culture has now put that into us, we can see why community's gotten so hard.
I think what I have gotten from this Bible study and just our conversations also, and your values, like watching those play out, even just in our work, is that to express Christianity, to express Christ within us, there are things that the individual can do that the group can't, and there are things that the group can do that the individual can't. And it requires both for you to fully articulate our calling.
Absolutely. I love the way you put that. God's given each of us a set of gifts.
Yeah.
But he's already told us in advance, these gifts are not for you.
Right. Which is maddening. Why would he do it that way?
I thought this was about making me great.
That's right.
No, I want you to open this gift, and I want you to share it with other people so that they can be edified and helped and built up. So if you keep opening this gift in isolation, that's idolatry.
Right.
You're worshiping the gift. But if I have a gift, I'm expected to use it to help a small, very specific local group of people.
Right.
and to do that week in, week out with humility. Man, I don't know about you, but like sometimes I just want to be in charge.
All the time. Oh my gosh.
I walk into a small group that I'm not leading. It's within 5 minutes something about all the ways I would do this differently.
Yep. Wrong. I sound like a presidential debate.
Right.
Just like, wrong.
It's so arrogant.
Yeah.
But if we can start confronting these attitudes, this is what I love about going back through the basics of what it means to be in biblical community, because it exposes some of the stuff that our culture has just made normal.
Right.
And one of them is just, I have to have it my way.
Yep. And that is as important. Your individualism is as important as the institution you're participating with.
Yep.
I don't know if a friend of mine was quoting somebody. So, dear viewer, dear listener, if you know, please let me know. But they made a statement the other day that has really stuck with me. And it went something like, the person who is talking about community is destined to never find it. But the person who just loves the people around them is destined to be a part of community. And I feel like that's so unsatisfying, but that is so resonant, that every place that I have found community in my life has been from just accepting the situation that God might have put me here for a reason, and I need to respond to that and try to make something out of this, as opposed to keep on looking of like, that one person just rubbed me the wrong way, or they brought up this one really sore subject, or they were insensitive about this thing, or I know that they voted for somebody else. Those things, they can be an absolute wedge, but to rise above that, I feel like is what Christ actually called us to do.
You and I had a great conversation in the car about duty and obligation and obedience.
Yeah.
How much of relationship building is just, at the end of the day, obedience?
Yeah.
I mean, we want to ride the wave of those Sundays where
Right.
worship was on fire.
Your emotions are just up here. Oh, I feel so
Small
filled.
groups were just intimate.
Yeah.
And we left feeling the glory of the Shekinah Lord.
That's right. That's right.
And most Sundays at church aren't like that. I've always said that when I was a pastor for 17 years, I firmly believe this. It wasn't for me ever like Christmas Eve or Easter or those big Sundays that I always felt like those were great Sundays. It was always the Sunday like February 21st.
That's right. Coming out of nowhere.
I walked in thinking it's going to be a really average day at church, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And it turned into something that I never dreamed.
Yeah.
When you stick at something, when you stick at a place, when you stick at in a relationship, when you stick in a small group, over time, if you're just obedient, those relationships turn into something special. But you got to give it time. It's crock pot and it's not microwave. And we live in a microwave culture. And that early church, they didn't know the pace of life that we know.
Yeah.
They weren't connected to the greater world. They didn't have devices. They didn't have all of these entertainment options. They weren't streaming at home.
Right.
They just had each other. And I wonder, don't you? Like, I wonder who is happier.
Oh, I know. Beyond a shadow of doubt. It wasn't even slow cooker for them. It was fire roasted. It was something that was just going to take half the day. And they were just going to sit there and break bread over it.
There's a guy named Oliver Burkeman, not a Christian, wrote a book called 4,000 Weeks. And the subtitle is about the myth of productivity. And in there, he gives a lot of examples of how we think we've made progress in the world by certain things that have happened. And he said, for example, electronic birthday cards.
Why is that the example?
He said it used to be that you had to sit down and address an envelope and take a pen and write a note, put it in the envelope, get a stamp, take it to the post office, and mail it. And there was a lot of work that went into it.
Yeah.
Now, within 45 seconds, you can fire off an e-birthday card, and it's massively impersonal.
Yeah. And it has sparkly roses on it, and my grandma loves them.
Convenience is now the enemy of intimacy.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing it in the church. Like, people are choosing convenience over community. I am tempted every Sunday. I always want to write about things that I'm personally struggling with. And this is, even after pastoring for 17 years, when we came out of quarantine, I remember thinking, man, now we got to get like dressed on Sunday and
That's right.
like show up. And,
Yeah. I can't wear my scrubs.
And there's so many annoying people at church that I don't have to see when I'm on the screen. And they probably think I'm annoying and they don't have to see me.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be easier if we were just pod people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, that's not making us happy.
No.
It's not making us feel fulfilled. The early church really understood proximity.
I feel like that's one thing that's, everything has been said 6 ways to Sunday about social media, but I feel like that's a particularly pernicious version of human connection because it feels like you're doing it. It feels like I'm connecting with people, but we wind up just outsourcing that connection to algorithms and Mark Zuckerberg. And when I become aware of that, I always feel, devastated that I fell for it again. What would you say to the generation that's coming up, maybe behind the current one that's going to be participating with Bible studies, Gen Alpha, Gen X, as they're growing into this? What would you say to them about the particular challenges that they would face with human connection?
Yeah. I was recently talking to someone about the red flags that I see in young leaders. Mm-hmm. First of all, I want to say there's a lot of really good things I see in young leaders. They're more committed to work-life balance. They're less workaholics than I think.
Authentic people.
Very committed to authenticity and empathy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good to be celebrated. One of the things I've noticed about younger leaders is they tend to bail when it gets hard.
Oh, yeah.
So when we hire people here at Lifeway, if they're young and 18 months in, it's not like a really rewarding or satisfying experience.
Right.
There's just so many options. They'll just go work somewhere else.
Right.
And as I look at that generation, there's so many church options in certain parts of the country. The more options there are, the more they're going to be tempted to say, you know what, we've been here 6 months. I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
Let's hop to another church. And before long, you've spent 5-10 years jumping from church to church to church, and nobody knows you.
Yeah. And you've never been feeling it.
Yeah. And I was even thinking about those three purposes of the church: ministry to God, ministry to other believers, ministry to the world. In any church, all three of those are always cycling in health. So you might be at church right now where the small groups are awesome, and man, there's a lot of outreach, but worship is just rough. Well, they lost their worship leader. So they got this lay guy up there who's, strumming 3 chords.
Hanging on for dear life.
Making it happen. And it's not great.
Yeah.
But you know what? As soon as they get a new worship leader, something happens and the small group ministry fragments. So it's like we're constantly searching for utopia when it comes to the local church. And it's just never going to be perfect. So we have to accept it in all of its wild imperfections and continue to be committed to it.
What do you think that utopia, that vision of utopia, is a byproduct of? Like, how is it that everybody's expectation, and that's painting with a broad brush, but most people's expectation is that if this is of Christ, this should feel perfect?
I think most people, as the old saying goes, are living lives of quiet desperation.
Oh, yeah.
Many people who come to a church, they're deeply lonely. They're alienated from their families. Their marriage has gotten hard. Their kids have not turned out to be shining, sterling examples of citizenship.
Right.
And they're broken.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for a place where some of those holes in their heart can be filled. And worship does it. I mean, you go and experience like a powerful worship service, and it gives you a shot in the arm to get back out there and live another day. When you get into a small group where all of a sudden real friendship is developing, it's like, wow, I finally found my people. And there's a really powerful sense of humanity that comes when I am now surrounded by people who get me and I get them.
Right.
Or you're engaged in a service project with your church, and all of a sudden it's like, man, it's been a long time since I served the poor.
Right.
And how good that felt to just for one day put down my self-absorption and care about other people. All these things that the church offers are an essential vitamin, I think, for just being a good human being. So I think there's always going to be a hunger for it.
Yeah.
But because we live on this side of heaven,
Right.
it's never going to taste like it got the right amount of salt.
Right. There's a peace that is unattainable.
Man, it's so good, but it could be a little bit better. And
Yeah.
online, it looks like this church has got that.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
yeah.
you know
they got
what?
bounce houses down there.
Let's-
go. Let's go. Pastor's flying in on some fly wires. Let's do this.
Or the opposite. Hey, they
Yeah.
got a real stripped back
They're
service.
real over there.
No pretense down there.
That's right.
I don't have to deal with fog.
That's right. No fun. No fake juice.
Then you get into that church and you realize, you know what? These people are really shallow.
Yeah. They're
You know,
just as messed up, and they're all like of the same personality type.
So I'll just keep shopping my whole life and never have
That's
to
it.
actually make a purchase. Together, I think is really written toward this generation that's just continually shopping but never finding real intimacy. And what Scripture says is it's right there under your nose.
I love that. You just have to invest in it. I once was a part of a small group that was really beautiful, and it was lovely, and we poured into each other, and we did life together, and we all had kids around the same time, and we struggled with being early parents or new parents. We struggled with finding homes, apartments to be able to live into, helped each other move, and it ended. And when I look back at that small group, I see that was a fracturing point where people felt like they had it and they lost it. And it goes back to the Shakespearean quote, is it better to have loved and lost than to have ever loved at all? What would you say to the people who have experienced community or are really scared of losing community? And how can they think better about it through this Bible study?
Oh, man, you just put your finger on a nerve. You know, what is it about the human experience that we don't fully value something until it's over?
Yeah.
As the old 80s hair band said, you don't know what you got till it's gone.
Till it's gone, yeah.
People who have experienced like great church experience
Yeah.
or a great small group experience, when it ends, and it does end,
Yeah.
you kind of spend the rest of your life wondering how you can resurrect it.
Right.
And maybe you get another chance at that. Maybe you don't. Some of it, I think, you know, Ecclesiastes says, do not look at the former days and say, why were they better than these? It is not wise to ask this. Ecclesiastes. There's something about church that when we're walking through really good seasons, we don't appreciate it.
Right.
And then when it's over, we spend the rest of our life wanting it back. When I think the best and healthiest option is whatever's right in front of you, whether it's this broken little band of people that you never would have picked, make the most of that opportunity.
Yeah.
The more we like keep looking back like Uncle Rico, like, are we really?
Throwing football over mountains.
I used to throw that thing, country mile. You know, that's what I hear. Sometimes I hear people talk about that with church. It's like, man, back in the day, we had X preacher and like he was just so great and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're going to spend the rest of your life talking about how great it used to be, or you're going to dig in and make this as good as it can be.
Yeah.
And those pity parties are just so easy to find.
Which is a call to live in the here and now. And I know that is a daily battle.
Absolutely.
You have to renew your mind to that every
Yes.
single day.
So if you're going to a church right now and it just doesn't, you're not feeling it.
Right.
Before you run down the road and try another church, I would strongly encourage you to walk through this study.
Yeah.
It has a way, as we look at the passages, to like reorient us around what's really important. And in a culture that is often amplifying things that aren't important, the Bible brings us back to those foundational principles. Like, this is what it means to be in community.
Right.
And we should put our eyes on what God says is beautiful and not what the culture says is beautiful.
Right. As a pastor, is there? I know that your time as a church planter, as a minister, has greatly informed this study. What do you think gives you a unique perspective right now as a former pastor and now organizational leader and SBC entity head. You're an entity head, right?
Yep.
How does that give you a perspective to talk about this issue, and what is that perspective?
Yeah, I've had 3 major seasons in my life of ministry. One was pastoring a large regional church in West Tennessee. The second was planting a church in Denver, Colorado. And then third is being the president of Lifeway. I would say the one common thread among all of those is that relationships really are the thing you go and buy the field for. I've always loved that story where the guy's walking across the field and he's got like a cane or something. And as he's walking, like thunk, he hits something and he stops and takes his fingers and spreads it out. And there's a box in there and he opens it, and whatever's in there, it says he went, sold everything he had, and he bought that field so he could legitimately own whatever was in that box.
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't lying when he said it's a relationship with God and a relationship with people that's in that box. The greatest commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. We make life so complicated. We're chasing all these other things. But the thing we really want is relationships and depth and intimacy. And the local church is still, with all of its flaws, the best context for experiencing that intimacy. So don't give up. Keep going back to the Bible and believing what it says about relationships and church.
I love that. Okay, I know we have to start wrapping up. I had one more question, and maybe it's an ending point. I think that this Bible study is really beautiful for a church context. But I think that it can go further than that when we're talking about community and unity. Talk to me about how you feel like it will inform someone's view of the capital C church, of all of Christendom, cross-denomination. If we're talking about unity and we're talking about togetherness, eventually that topic will come up with the level of bifurcation that's happened.
Yeah.
How do you think that this Bible study will inform that view?
Yeah. I mean, look at the different denominations today. Which ones don't think teaching is important?
Yeah.
Which ones would say fellowship means nothing? Which ones would say we don't do communion in any form? Which ones would say we don't pray?
Right.
Those 4 pillars of the church are there in all the denominations. Now, it may be exercised in different ways. The preacher might be in a robe off center.
Right.
But he's still preaching the word.
He is.
It really brings us back to all of the little tiny things that drive us crazy are not the things that God's all that worried about.
Right.
What he really wants is human beings pooling together in small communities and making these 4 things a large part of their lives. Everything else is just extra. And so, we get so bent out of shape about our favorite pet doctrines, whether people really believe babies should be baptized or people are saved because God initiated it or they initiated it.
Right.
The Acts chapter 2 church doesn't seem to be having a lot of those conversations. Man, they're enjoying relationships. They're getting each other's houses. They're acting like a family.
Yeah.
And I love having people as friends across denominational lines. I am a Southern Baptist, but I am not a Southern Baptist first.
Right.
I'm a Christian first, and I love having people who see it differently than me, who come at. One of my favorite things is to watch 2 really intelligent people who are at opposite sides humbly engage.
Yeah. It's a beautiful model.
It's so fun to hear the perspectives. And yet we have gotten in this mode in the church. It's like, I need to find the people who vote like me, believe like me, interpret
like me.
Scripture like me, dress like me, then I'll be happy.
Yeah.
Whereas the diversity of relationships the local church offers is sometimes a challenge, but in the end, it's the greatest beauty.
It is.
I mean, if you look at a small group, any small group I've ever been a part of, I never would have said all these people are the ones I would have picked. And I doubt I would have made their list.
Yeah.
And yet, for whatever reason, we've all gotten thrown into this room together. We're doing life together. And I'm going to make a decision. Either I'm going to resent that and look for better people, or I'm going to accept this as God's will for my life. And these are the people that I'm supposed to love. And I have something to give them, and they have something to give me.
It reminds me of my favorite quote in The Essentials Unity, in the Non-Essentials Liberty, in all things charity.
Love it.
If I was ever going to get a tattoo, dear listener, that would be it. Not that you care.
What are you doing this afternoon? Let's go get a tattoo.
Let's go. Dude, I'll be honest. We had a Dirty Santa the other day, and I got a Amazon tattoo gun and gave it away
That's
for Dirty Santa.
fantastic.
And it was a big hit.
Can you do the Together logo on my pectoral?
Done. Yeah.
Hey, before we finish, let me mention a couple of places where I think this study could really help the church.
Please.
Real practical. One of the questions I've been asking Lifeway people a lot is, what room are we in when the box of this resource is opened in the church? Because we need to be designing things that are to the church. When I was writing this study, I was thinking about a couple of people. Number one, the senior pastor who people want to show up for the sermon, they don't want to be in small groups.
Yeah.
It would be a real great tool. I mean, I really mean it. Preach through some passages about community and then have the entire church do this study together. It could bring in an enormous revival and togetherness.
Right.
I thought about the Sunday after Easter. That's always a Sunday. We have a bunch of people who came on Easter. They're coming back.
Yeah.
Launch a study like this one, like Together, that helps those people understand why just coming to get a sermon just isn't going to get it done.
Right.
Put them all in a room together and study together. I think it could be a really good tool for the church. And then finally, if you're in a small group and people are just phoning it in,
Right.
and you're tired of week by week having the same conversations, take 6 weeks and really talk about, what does this mean? What are we doing here? Have you seen that clip in Seinfeld where he's like, what are we doing here? What is this? Our lives.
Yeah. What are we doing with our lives? We are weak men.
I think that's what we have to ask with small group. It's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Are we just trying to fill an hour while our kids are in youth group?
Yeah.
Or are we actually trying to build biblical relationships
Yeah.
here? I think the study could be really helpful in that regard. So I hope it'll be used in a variety of ways.
I love that. Even the brief time I've had with it, I've gotten a lot out of it and can see the vast implications that it could have for a church to talk about these things directly. Sometimes that's all you need is just a forum to be able to talk about the things that feel like they're a given, but they're not, and they actually go really deep.
Yeah.
So don't take it for granted. Don't take your community for granted. Don't take that everybody understands what that means for granted. And allow them the space and the time and the intentionality to dig into it. And let's just all state the things that we're going to be agreeing on and how we're coming into it. So before we go, can you talk to me a bit about how this book is formatted? Is this just a essential video model and everybody just kind of goes home after that?
I love the way this was put together because it combines media with active learning. So it's not like, here I am on the screen, sit down, watch Ben teach, and talk about it. I mean, there's some value to that. But Lifeway's model of discipleship, I really believe in that we're asking people to study the scriptures on their own,
Right.
then come and talk about it with some video, like, to catalyze conversation. So the Bible study itself is a group experience, but also some personal work you do. And then you sit down and, listen to the video teaching, and hopefully it will enhance what you've been doing in your personal study, not replace.
Right.
So our team that does short-term Bible studies, they really are like the best in the business. They're incredible. So they took these 6 lessons and they put it into a format that I think groups are really going to love, which is the richness of media content and active learning.
I love it. What I really liked about that format is that when you're by yourself and you're going through the readings and you're answering the questions, they're causing you to think about the group. And when you're in a group, they're causing you to think about each other. And it's just a really healthy dynamic of saying, they're well, what am I trying to say? They're well yoked in terms of how you're spending your time and your energy and what you're thinking about in those different contexts.
Yep.
And I think it's really going to help a lot of people to come together.
Well, thanks for taking time to help me talk about it.
Thank you for inviting me to the glass house. I hope I didn't break it or crack anything.
It is fragile.
It is very fragile.
All right, we'll see you next time.
See you, Ben.
The Glass House is executive produced by Angie Elkins, edited and engineered by Donnie Gordon with help from Nathan Howard. Show notes and production help from Nikki Ogden. Photography by Emily Bergeron and Bailey Watley. Recorded at the Lifeway Podcast Studio in Brentwood, Tennessee.